Hey guys, Georgia Soundtracks here. This week we're going to talk a little bit about big modern day excursion steam, conjunction with consisting with diesels, and how Tsunami 2 can help you reproduce the work of the real railroads prototypically so that you can have more fun running your trains. So let's get started. So as summer is approaching, I know many of you guys have models of big steam, and we like to run those with modern day excursions. Example here in front of me is Locomotive 844. So this is a brand new model from Broadway Limited that I've taken and shown you a step-by-step video that will be coming soon to show you how to convert that to a Tsunami 2. So we're going to show you a lot of the ways that you can add different lights and things like that to the model. We're going to show you step by step in a future video so that way you can have a model that's working the way you want it and more prototypically. But once we have the model, we want to run it with our modern day diesels. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about the relationship between the steam locomotive and the diesel when they're consisted together. We're going to throw in a little sound card to add into the experience as well. So first off, one of the things with Soundtracks is that you have a fully flexible mapping functions. Means I can take any function and assign it to any button that I want. And what that does is it allows me to intelligently look through the list of steam functions as well as the list of diesel functions and decide which ones are going to be the same and which ones are going to be different. So for example, function 4 on our steam locomotive decoder actually plays the sounds of the cylinder cocks. But function 4 on the diesels actually plays the dynamic braking. Very unique and very distinct different sounds. Now, when you're running a consist, you want both of those. So where FlexMap comes into play is I have taken the function 4 and assigned it to the dynamic braking. So the F4 on the dynamic braking will play out of here. Now, when F4 comes on the steam locomotive, you won't hear anything. So I've moved the cylinder cocks actually to function 9. So that way I can turn on function 9 and you'll be able to hear the cylinder cocks. And then later on with the relationship between the steam and the diesel, you'll hear the dynamic brakes and you won't hear any change on the steam locomotive. So this is just one of many examples. One of the other things I do on my personal models is function 8 is actually applying the brakes. So the F8 is my brake application. So therefore I move the mute to function 19 so that it is not in the first function buttons because I don't use it that often. But I can access function 19 with my DCC system. Now, the other part of this is what's called advanced consisting. Now, I know this sounds like a scary term because of the word advanced, but I'm going to tell you guys, don't be afraid of it. This is how you're going to be able to do this prototypically. So let's talk about the relationship first. So when the steam locomotive and the excursions are set up with your diesel locomotive behind, the diesel locomotive isn't there for actually helping pull the train. It's there to use for dynamic braking effects. Or if there was a problem with the steam locomotive, to be able to push or pull the train where it needed to get to safety so that the crew can work on and fix the problem. But when you're operating the locomotive, the steam locomotive is doing all the work, as I'm sure you've seen with a lot of the videos with the steam billowing out and the smoke billowing out of the exhaust stack. But the diesel is just sitting at idle. So what I've done is I've taken my straight to idle feature of the Tsunami 2 decoder and I've put that on function 11. So that when I hit function 11, nothing happens on the steam locomotive because remember I've moved my brakes to F8. Nothing will happen, but now my dynamic brake sounds are going to come on. Now again, this is done using advanced consisting. So advanced consisting, as you've seen, we've done a bunch of videos on this before, but what this does is this sets up the consist as a single address. In this case right now, I've got this consist set up as address 20. And you've heard me use that address before. Typically if I'm traveling, I'll use that number just because it's easy for me to remember because it's the number I wear on the back of my jersey when I play hockey. It's also my extension at Soundtracks. But now when I select my throttle, I'm going to use address 20. So my throttle is going to send one command to address 20. Now, the advanced consisting part is I tell the decoders which function commands to respond to sent to address 20. So for example, when I look at my locomotives, the whistle and the bell are going to play out of the steam locomotive, not necessarily the diesel. So what I've done is when I send my command to address 20, the steam locomotive, address 844, is actually going to respond to the whistle and the bell sounds The diesel, because I have not told it to respond to those when sent to address 20, is now going to ignore that command, and so you'll never hear it. Now, if I select that locomotive's address, 1943, you will actually hear me be able to blow the horn. So I'm not messing with the volumes at all. What I'm doing is I'm just simply telling the decoders which functions to respond to, and by default, which ones to ignore when I send them to address 20. Now, you can check out this video here where we do a webinar all about advanced consisting, webinar number 14. So be sure to check that out for the details. So now that we know kind of how these things work together, let's see it at play. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute these locomotives. So you'll hear the steam locomotive, you can hear the dynamo on because I have my headlight on, and you can hear the diesel locomotive idle. So now when I blow my whistle, you can hear that coming out of the steam locomotive, but not the diesel. Again, we're going to turn on our bell. So we're getting ready to move. So now we're going to open the cylinder cocks. So again, I said function 9 is my cylinder cocks. We're going to crack the throttle to speed step 1, and we're going to release the brakes on F8. And you can hear the brakes release on the train as you see them starting to move. Now again, another key component here is making sure your momentum and braking rates are matched between all the locomotives. So we turn off our bell, we turn off the cylinder cocks, and now we start accelerating. But again, you're never hearing the diesel engine going out of idle because I have function 11 enabled to make sure it stays at idle. So next up is our dynamic braking. As I mentioned, the locomotive is actually primarily there for dynamic braking. So when we're descending a grade for a long period of time, you're actually going to trigger the dynamic braking on the locomotive, the diesel locomotive, I should say, to make sure that you have that train under control. So it's not all the mechanical brakes of either the train brake or the locomotive brake. So to do that, we have F4 enabled on the diesel locomotive, but not on the steam, because the steam, as I mentioned, I moved my cylinder cocks to function 9. So F4 doesn't do anything. Now in this particular case, you don't get the CV116 dynamic braking rate because that feature doesn't exist in the steam decoders. So we're only going to use the diesel decoder for the sound effect. So again, it's not going to slow the train down, but it will make the sound effect. So we're going to show you that right now. Now, one of the things I forgot to mention was the lights. Now, when you're using an advanced consist, you can actually tell the decoder which light functions to respond to and which ones to ignore. So both of these locomotives have headlights, but when I turn on the function 0 key, only the headlight on the lead unit, in this case 844, is actually illuminated. Now, the other lights, this one has ditch lights, but are going to stay extinguished on function 24 because I have function 24 on this one to control the class lights. So we're going to go ahead and turn those on now. Now, the next one is number boards. Now, this particular model doesn't have the number boards on yet. Stay tuned. But when I turn on function 25, you see that the number boards actually illuminate on the steam locomotive. Now, when I turn on function 26, now function 26 is actually where the truck lights are at on the SD70, but function 26 on the steam locomotive is the cab light. Well, since we're running in supposed daylight, we're going to leave that off for the time being. But if I wanted to turn it on, I have only the cab light turning it on, because in the real world, 844 is actually controlling the diesel through a control stand actually in the steam locomotive. Now the next up is function 27. This is where I have turning on my running lights, but I also have it turning on my step lights. So to address 20, again, using my advanced consist, I'm going to turn on function 27, and you're going to see the step lights on the diesel locomotive, and then you're going to see the running lights on the steam locomotive, both illuminate together at the same time. Now again, this is where the advanced consisting comes into play. So I don't have to sit there and try to play with the function mapping or the CV settings to get it to manipulate it, because once I set CV19 back to 0, these locomotives are now fully functioning, all sound, everything back to their default settings that I've set for the previous locomotive. So when I set this one out, if I take CV19, set it to 0, I have full control of my headlight, my ditch lights, my truck lights, everything in this locomotive. Now the last thing I've added is actually the emergency control light. And again, you can trigger this on with the consist. Now to this consist, address 20, when I send an emergency stop command, you can actually see the red light on the back of the 844 illuminate, and you can also see the light inside the cab of the 1943. So with the emergency light, again, you can change directions or release the emergency stop. Now again, this is going to partially depend on which command station you're using, because in most command stations, the first press of the e-stop button is a local command telling, in this case, address 20 to come to a stop. In some systems, when you press it multiple times, it'll send out an all stop, but other systems, when you press it, it shuts the layout down, so be sure to check out your DCC system's capabilities. But the Tsunami 2 allows you to have lighting effects like we've talked about in the past, triggered with the e-stop. You can easily add them into the consist here as well. Now, as I mentioned in this boxcar, I do have a sound car decoder. Now, we've added wipers to the underside of the trucks to make sure we have track pickup. We have a speaker and a current keeper in there. Now, the braking rates actually exist in the sound car, and these are set with CV3 and 4 and then CV61. But remember, we don't have two different braking systems to match the Tsunami 2. So what you're actually going to do is you're going to take the CV61 braking rate that's in the sound car, and you're going to match that to the CV118 braking rate that's in the Tsunami 2. So that way you can have that perfect match. So you'll get the squeal coming from the sound car, but the actual air brake release coming from the locomotives. And that way, with all those values tied together to match, the locomotives and the sounds will all start and stop together. So let's take a closer look at that with the sound car. Well guys, I hope this has been helpful for you. Again, feel free to call us anytime. We are happy to help explain how all of this works, but be sure to check out the user's guides because a lot of the explanations are there. Plus, again, check out our videos on advanced consisting and use your imagination and just see what you can do, because there's a lot of things you can do with Tsunami 2 that we're generally not taking advantage of. So we want to help you make the best out of your locomotive and decoder purchase.